Dr. Sarah Chen had been running the Wildlife Rescue Center for 15 years, but she had never seen anything like the creatures huddled in the burned clearing. The forest fire had swept through the mountain range 3 days ago, leaving behind charred trees and displaced animals. Her team had been conducting their usual post-fire rescue operations when they stumbled upon them. "What do you think they are?" whispered Marcus, her youngest volunteer, crouching beside the 3 small beings. They were no bigger than house cats, covered in scales that shimmered between deep purple and midnight blue. Tiny wings folded against their backs, and their eyes glowed like amber gems in the smoky twilight. Sarah approached slowly, her veterinary instincts taking over. The creatures didn't flee. Instead, they huddled closer together, making soft, chirping sounds that tugged at her heart. Their scales were dulled with ash, and she could see they were weak from hunger and exposure. "I honestly don't know," Sarah admitted, kneeling down. "They look almost like baby dragons from fairy tales. But that's impossible." The smallest of the 3, barely the size of a kitten, took a tentative step toward Sarah. Its large eyes held an intelligence that made her breath catch. When she extended her hand, the creature sniffed carefully before pressing its warm snout against her palm. "They're definitely reptilian," Sarah murmured, gently examining the little one. "But their body temperature is warm, almost mammalian. And look at these wing structures. They're not like any bird or bat I've studied." Marcus pulled out his phone to take pictures, but Sarah stopped him. "No documentation yet. Let's get them back to the center first. If word gets out about these, whatever they are, we'll have government agencies and researchers swarming the place before we can properly help them." The rescue team carefully collected the 3 creatures, wrapping them in soft blankets. During the journey back, Sarah noticed how they comforted each other. The larger 2 flanking the smallest, and making gentle purring sounds when it whimpered. At the Wildlife Center, Sarah set up a special enclosure in her private rehabilitation room. She lined it with heat lamps and soft bedding, creating a warm, safe environment. The creatures explored their new home cautiously, their eyes taking in every detail with remarkable intelligence. "What should we feed them?" asked Maria, the center's other veterinarian. "They have sharp teeth like carnivores, but also flat grinding surfaces in the back. Maybe they're omnivores?" Sarah decided to offer a variety of foods. She prepared small portions of fresh fish, fruits, vegetables, and even some raw meat. To her surprise, the creatures showed preferences that seemed almost human-like. They carefully inspected each offering, sniffing and touching before deciding what to eat. The smallest one, which Sarah had started calling Ember due to the way its eyes glowed, seemed particularly fond of apples. It would hold the fruit pieces in its tiny claws and nibble delicately, making contented humming sounds. The middle-sized one, who she called Mist for its silvery blue coloring, preferred fish, and would actually wash its food in the water bowl before eating. The largest, whom she named Storm because of the way its scales darkened when it was upset, showed a remarkable appetite for both meat and, surprisingly, flowers. Over the following days, Sarah and her team established a routine. They would spend hours with the creatures, observing their behaviors and ensuring they were healthy. The dragons, for that's what Sarah had privately started calling them, showed remarkable intelligence and emotional depth. Ember would often approach Sarah when she seemed tired, gently nuzzling against her leg in what could only be described as comfort. Mist had developed a habit of organizing objects in the enclosure, arranging toys and food bowls in neat patterns. Storm appeared to be the protector of the group, always positioning itself between its companions and any perceived threat. The most remarkable discovery came on the 4th day. Sarah was sitting in the enclosure, updating her observation notes, when Ember approached with something in its mouth. The little dragon dropped a small, perfectly shaped flower at Sarah's feet. Not just any flower, but one that had been growing outside the center, beyond the walls of the enclosure. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered. "How did you get this?" She looked around the secure room. All windows were closed, and the enclosure was sealed. Yet somehow, Ember had obtained a fresh daisy from the garden outside. When Sarah looked at the little dragon questioningly, Ember simply tilted its head and made a soft, trilling sound that almost sounded like laughter. That night, Sarah stayed late to observe them. Through the security cameras, she watched in amazement as the three dragons engaged in what could only be described as play. They would chase each other around the enclosure, performing aerial maneuvers despite their small size. But more than that, they seemed to be practicing something, creating small sparks of light between their claws, making tiny whirlwinds with their wings, and causing frost patterns to appear on the water bowl. Sarah realized she wasn't dealing with ordinary creatures. These were beings of immense potential, possibly even magical abilities. Yet they had chosen to trust her and her team completely. They showed no fear, only gratitude and affection toward their human caretakers. As the weeks passed, word spread quietly through the small community about the unusual animals at Sarah's rescue center. Visitors began arriving, children from the local school, elderly residents from the nearby town, and even skeptical scientists who had heard rumors. Each visitor was amazed by the creature's behavior. The dragons seemed to sense people's emotions and would respond accordingly. They would gently approach grieving visitors, playfully interact with excited children, and maintain respectful distances from those who were nervous or afraid. Old Mr. Henderson, who had lost his wife recently and rarely spoke to anyone, spent an entire afternoon sitting quietly with Storm. The dragon seemed to understand his sadness and simply rested its warm body against the old man's arm, purring softly. When Mr. Henderson finally left, there were tears in his eyes, but for the first time in months, he was smiling. Little Emma, a girl from town who had been born with a developmental disability and struggled to communicate, formed an instant bond with Ember. The dragon would listen patiently to her attempts at words, responding with gentle chirps and nods, as if understanding perfectly. Emma's mother later told Sarah that her daughter had started speaking more clearly and confidently since meeting Ember. Dr. Williams, a skeptical biologist from the university, arrived expecting to debunk what he called small-town fantasies. He left 3 hours later, speechless and shaken, after mist had somehow created a perfect miniature rainbow in the air above the water bowl. Just for his amazement, Sarah began to understand that these creatures were not just intelligent, they were empathic, capable of sensing and responding to human emotions in ways that seemed almost supernatural. Yet, despite their obvious extraordinary nature, they remained content in the simple care she and her team provided. The dragons grew larger and stronger each day, but their gentle nature never changed. They would follow Sarah around the center like devoted pets, help with simple tasks by fetching items or organizing supplies, and seemed to take genuine joy in the daily routines of the rescue center. One evening, as Sarah was cleaning their enclosure, she found herself talking to them as if they were old friends. "I don't know what you three really are," she said, scratching Ember behind the tiny ridges that might one day be horns. "But I want you to know that caring for you has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. You've brought so much joy, not just to me, but to everyone who's met you." The three dragons looked at her with their intelligent eyes, and Sarah could swear they understood every word. Storm approached and gently placed a claw on her hand, while Mist and Ember moved to either side of her, creating what felt like a protective, loving circle. What Sarah didn't know was that high above the mountain range, something ancient and powerful had been searching. The fearsome titan had been scouring the burned forests, following traces of familiar scent and energy. It had been searching for 3 precious offspring who had been lost during the great fire that had swept through their domain. The titan's search was growing more desperate with each passing day, and its anguish was beginning to affect the weather patterns across the entire region. Soon, very soon, the search would lead to the small wildlife rescue center, nestled in the valley below. 2 months after finding the 3 mysterious creatures, Sarah's wildlife rescue center had become something extraordinary. The dragons, as she now openly called them, had grown to the size of medium dogs, their scales becoming more vibrant, and their abilities more pronounced. With each passing day, Ember had developed the remarkable ability to encourage plant growth. The garden around the rescue center had never been more beautiful, with flowers blooming out of season and vegetables growing larger and more nutritious than ever before. The little dragon would spend hours each morning gently touching plants with its claws, and wherever it walked, the grass grew greener and more lush. Mist had shown an affinity for healing. When injured animals arrived at the center, Mist would approach them carefully and emit a soft, musical humming. Animals that should have taken weeks to recover were healing in days. Sarah had witnessed a hawk with a broken wing completely mend after just 3 sessions with Mist, though she couldn't explain the science behind it. Storm had revealed protective abilities that bordered on the supernatural. When a group of rowdy teenagers had tried to break into the center one night, Storm had somehow created an invisible barrier that prevented them from approaching. They later told the police they felt an overwhelming sense that they should leave and do something better with their time, eventually volunteering at the local community center instead. The word about the dragons had spread beyond the small community, but Sarah had been careful to limit visitors and maintain the creatures' privacy. She trusted her instincts that these beings needed protection from those who might exploit them. Dr. Martinez, a linguist from the nearby university, had become a regular visitor after discovering that the dragons seemed to understand multiple languages. They responded appropriately to commands in English, Spanish, and even ancient Latin that Dr. Martinez had tested them with out of curiosity. Sarah, Dr. Martinez said during one of his visits, watching Ember carefully arrange colored stones in complex patterns, "I don't think these are just intelligent animals. I think they're trying to communicate in ways we haven't fully understood yet." Indeed, the dragons had developed what appeared to be their own form of communication with the humans. They would create intricate patterns with objects, use specific combinations of chirps and trills, and even seem to project emotions directly into people's minds during close contact. Young Tommy, a 8-year-old boy who visited with his grandmother, had become particularly close to all 3 dragons. Tommy had been born with hearing difficulties, but somehow the dragons had learned to communicate with him through gentle touches and visual cues. His grandmother was amazed when Tommy began describing complex emotions and ideas that the dragons were apparently sharing with him. "Ember says the flowers are happy when they drink morning water," Tommy told his grandmother one day. "And Mist wants to help the sick fox in the other room feel better. Storm is worried about something far away, something that's looking for them." Sarah paid close attention to Tommy's interpretations. If the boy was accurately understanding the dragons, then Storm's worry about something looking for them was concerning. She had noticed that all 3 dragons would sometimes stop what they were doing and look toward the mountains, their expressions becoming alert and anxious. The changes in weather patterns hadn't gone unnoticed in the region. Meteorologists were baffled by the sudden storms that would appear and disappear without following normal atmospheric patterns. Lightning would strike the mountain peaks repeatedly, and the winds carried sounds that some locals described as mournful calls echoing across the valleys. Sarah began to suspect that the dragon's family was searching for them. The thought filled her with both hope and dread. Hope because she knew the little ones belonged with their own kind, but dread because she couldn't imagine her life without them anymore. They had become more than rescue animals. They were family. The dragons seemed to sense her internal conflict. One evening, as she sat in their enclosure, feeling melancholy about the possibility of their eventual departure, all 3 approached her together. Ember placed a small claw on her hand. Mist rested its head against her shoulder, and Storm settled beside her with a gentle purr. Suddenly, Sarah felt a warm sensation in her mind. Not words, but pure emotion and understanding. The dragons were sharing their gratitude, their love, and their own sadness at the thought of leaving. But more than that, they were showing her images. Herself as they saw her, surrounded by a warm golden light, a protector and nurturer whose kindness had saved their lives. The emotional connection was so strong that Sarah found herself crying. But they were tears of joy rather than sadness. She realized that the bond they had formed would transcend physical separation. These creatures would remember her kindness forever, and she would always carry the memory of their trust and affection. As autumn arrived, the dragon's abilities continued to develop in remarkable ways. Ember could now create small, controlled flames that never burned anything but provided perfect warmth. Mist had learned to purify water and even seemed capable of healing emotional trauma, in addition to physical wounds. Storm could control air currents, and had once prevented a falling tree from hitting the center during a severe windstorm. The local community had embraced the dragons completely. Children would draw pictures of them in school. Elderly residents would bring handmade toys and treats, and local businesses had begun donating supplies to the rescue center, specifically to help care for the extraordinary creatures. Father Miguel from the local church visited regularly, claiming that being near the dragons strengthened his faith and helped him better counsel his parishioners. "There's something divine about them," he told Sarah. "Not in a religious sense, necessarily, but they seem to bring out the best in everyone they meet." Dr. Peterson, a child psychologist, had begun bringing some of her young patients to visit the dragons as a form of therapy. Children who had been withdrawn and traumatized would open up after spending time with the gentle creatures. The dragons seemed to instinctively know how to approach each child differently, providing exactly the type of comfort and encouragement needed. One particularly touching case involved a 7-year-old girl named Sophia who hadn't spoken since witnessing a car accident that had injured her father. Traditional therapy had made little progress, but after just 1 hour with the dragons, Sophia whispered her first words in 6 months. She told Mist, "Thank you for making my heart feel warm again." The dragons were also showing signs of homesickness that grew stronger each day. They would spend longer periods looking toward the mountains, and sometimes Sarah would find them huddled together, making soft keening sounds that broke her heart. She knew that despite their contentment at the rescue center, they belonged somewhere else. The strange weather phenomena had intensified as well. Pilots reported unusual atmospheric disturbances over the mountain range, and hikers described feeling watched by an unseen presence among the peaks. Some claimed to have seen enormous shadows moving among the clouds, though official investigations found no evidence of aircraft or large wildlife. Sarah had begun preparing herself emotionally for the inevitable reunion. She started documenting everything about the dragons: their behaviors, their abilities, their preferences, and most importantly, the positive impact they had on everyone who met them. She wanted their story to be preserved, regardless of what happened next. One night, as Sarah was working late in her office, she heard the dragons making sounds she had never heard before. Not distress calls, but something that sounded almost like song. She went to their enclosure and found them standing together, their faces turned toward the window that faced the mountains. Their scales were glowing softly, pulsing in rhythm with their vocalizations. The sound was beautiful and haunting, carrying across the valley like a beacon. Sarah realized they were calling to their family, letting them know where they were. The rescue worker in her knew this was right. Families should be together. But the woman who had grown to love these creatures felt her heart breaking. As she watched the dragons singing their ethereal song into the night, Sarah noticed something else. The usual sounds of the evening, crickets, owls, rustling leaves, had all fallen silent. The entire forest seemed to be listening to the dragon's call. And somewhere high in the mountains, something ancient and powerful heard that call and began moving toward the valley with purpose and desperate hope. The reunion that Sarah had both anticipated and dreaded was finally approaching. But what she couldn't have imagined was how profoundly the simple human kindness she had shown these creatures would change not just their fate, but the relationship between their species and humanity forever. The morning of the reunion began like any other, with Sarah arriving early to feed the dragons and tend to the other animals in her care. But as she approached their enclosure, she found Ember, Mist, and Storm standing in perfect formation, their scales brighter than she had ever seen them. They looked at her with eyes full of anticipation and something that looked remarkably like gratitude. "Today's the day, isn't it?" Sarah whispered, and all 3 dragons nodded in a distinctly human gesture they had learned during their months at the rescue center. The sky had taken on an unusual quality, not stormy, but charged with an energy that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Birds had stopped singing, and the usual chatter of forest animals had fallen into an expectant silence. By mid-morning, other staff members and volunteers had begun arriving, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Marcus, Maria, Dr. Martinez, and several of the regular visitors gathered at the center, drawn by an intuition they couldn't explain. Little Tommy arrived with his grandmother and immediately ran to the dragon enclosure. "They're excited," he announced to the assembled group, "but also sad. They say their parent is coming, and they're happy, but they don't want to leave their human family." As Tommy spoke, the temperature began to drop noticeably. Everyone looked toward the mountains where dark clouds were gathering with unnatural speed. The clouds weren't ordinary storm formations. They swirled in perfect spirals and seemed to shimmer with internal light. "Everyone should probably go inside," Sarah said nervously, but none of the visitors moved. They seemed compelled to witness whatever was about to happen. The wind began to pick up, but it wasn't chaotic or destructive. Instead, it felt purposeful, almost gentle, carrying with it a scent like rain on hot stones and something else, something ancient and powerful, that made everyone present feel both awed and protected. Thunder rumbled across the sky, but it wasn't the random crash of a storm. The sound had pattern and rhythm, almost like a massive heartbeat or a form of communication. The three dragons responded by singing again, their voices harmonizing in ways that seemed to make the very air dance with color. Then, through the gathering clouds, a shadow began to descend. At first, it was just a dark shape among the swirling mists. But as it came closer, its true size became apparent. The creature that emerged from the clouds was magnificent beyond description. The dragon that landed in the large field beside the rescue center was easily the size of a small aircraft. Its scales were the deep color of midnight, shot through with veins of silver that seemed to hold captured starlight. Its wings, when fully extended, cast shadows that covered half the rescue center grounds. But most striking of all were its eyes, ancient, wise, and filled with an intelligence that spoke of eons of existence. This was clearly the parent of the three young dragons, but while its size was intimidating, its demeanor was not threatening. The great dragon moved with careful grace, obviously aware of the fragile human structures and the small beings gathered below. Ember, mist, and storm burst from their enclosure, not through any door or gate, but simply by walking through the walls as if they were made of mist rather than solid material. They raced across the field toward their parent, their joyful cries echoing across the valley. The reunion was beautiful to witness. The great dragon lowered its massive head to nuzzle each of its offspring, making sounds that were both thunderous and gentle. The young dragons climbed onto their parents' back and neck, chittering excitedly as if telling the story of their adventures. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of simply departing with its young, the great dragon turned its attention to the humans gathered near the rescue center. Its gaze fixed on Sarah, and she felt the full weight of that ancient intelligence studying her. Sarah found herself walking forward, despite every logical instinct telling her to retreat. She stopped a respectful distance from the massive creature and looked up into those wise eyes. What happened next was beyond anything she could have imagined. The dragon's consciousness touched hers, not invasively, but with permission, sharing images and emotions at a speed that nearly overwhelmed her human mind. She saw the great fire that had swept through the dragon's mountain home, witnessed the panic as the young ones had been separated from their parent during the evacuation. She felt the anguish of a parent searching desperately for lost children, calling across mountain ranges and valleys for months without response. But then the dragon showed her other images, scenes from the rescue center that it had somehow been observing. Sarah saw herself through the dragon's eyes, witnessing her own actions with a perspective she had never considered. The late nights caring for sick animals, the gentle patience with frightened creatures, the way she had immediately embraced three beings that should have been impossible. The dragon shared more, images of each person who had visited the young ones. Mr. Henderson receiving comfort in his grief. Little Emma gaining confidence through communication. Sophia speaking her first words in months. The dragon had been watching it all, learning about human nature through the kindness shown to its offspring. Most remarkably, the dragon revealed the true nature of its young ones. They weren't just dragons, they were the future guardians of the boundary between the magical world and the human world. Each generation, 3 young dragons were chosen to learn about both realms, to understand the hearts of different species, and to bridge the gap between worlds that had grown apart over centuries. But never before had human beings shown such pure, selfless kindness to dragon young. Never before had an entire human community embraced magical beings without fear or desire for exploitation. The dragon parent was witnessing something unprecedented in thousands of years of history. Through their mental connection, Sarah understood that this moment was changing everything. The kindness shown by her and her community had proven something the Dragon Council had debated for millennia: that humans were capable of genuine goodness, worthy of trust and friendship. The dragon withdrew its consciousness from Sarah's mind gently, leaving her with a sense of profound honor and responsibility. Then, to everyone's amazement, the great dragon began to shrink, not disappearing, but taking on a smaller form, still clearly draconic, but now only slightly larger than a horse rather than an aircraft. In this more manageable size, the dragon approached the group of humans. When it spoke, its voice was like distant thunder. But somehow, everyone understood perfectly. "I am Aethon, guardian of the western peaks and parent to these 3 treasured ones," the dragon rumbled. "For 3 months, I have searched and despaired, but now, I have found more than my lost children. I have discovered proof of something we had hoped for, but never dared believe." The dragon's gaze swept across the assembled humans. "Your species has shown my offspring pure kindness with no expectation of reward. You have nurtured their abilities, celebrated their uniqueness, and loved them as family. This changes the ancient compact between our peoples." Dr. Martinez stepped forward, his academic curiosity overcoming his awe. "Ancient compact? You mean dragons and humans have interacted before?" Aethon's expression might have been amusement. "Young scholar, dragons were among your earliest teachers. We shared knowledge of fire, of healing, of understanding the natural world. But as your species grew numerous and some among you grew greedy for power, we withdrew to hidden places. The old alliances were broken." The dragon looked at the 3 young ones, who had positioned themselves between their parent and the humans, as if reluctant to choose sides. "But these 3 have learned something in your care that centuries of isolation could not teach them. They have learned to see the potential for good in human hearts." Tommy, with the fearless innocence of childhood, stepped forward. "Does this mean they have to go away forever?" Aethon lowered its great head to look at the boy directly. "What would you wish, young one?" "I wish they could visit," Tommy said seriously. "They make everyone happy, and we love them. But I know they need their dragon family too." The wisdom in the child's answer seemed to move the ancient dragon deeply. "From the mouths of the young," Aethon murmured. "Perhaps there is indeed a new path forward." The dragon straightened and addressed the entire group. "I propose something that has not existed for 1,000 years. A new alliance between our species, beginning with this place, with these people who have proven their worth through simple kindness." Sarah found her voice. "What kind of alliance?" "My children will complete their training with me, learning the ancient ways of our people," Aethon explained. "But they will also return here regularly, maintaining their connection to your community. They will serve as ambassadors between our species, and this rescue center will become a bridge between worlds." The dragon paused, its expression growing solemn. "But know this, the abilities you have seen in these young ones are merely the beginning. As they mature, they will become capable of extraordinary things. Ember will gain power over all growing things, able to heal entire forests or feed multitudes. Mist will master healing and purification on a scale that could cleanse polluted seas. Storm will command weather itself, able to bring rain to drought or calm the fiercest tempests." The implications of these revelations left the humans speechless. The little creatures they had been caring for were destined to become beings of almost godlike power. "Yet," Aethon continued, "power without wisdom and compassion leads only to tyranny. The kindness you have shown them, the examples of human goodness they have witnessed here, will guide them in using their abilities. You have not just saved 3 lost dragon children. You have shaped the future guardians of the world." As the day progressed, arrangements were made that seemed like something out of a fairy tale. The dragons would spend half of each year in the mountains, with their own kind, learning their heritage and responsibilities. The other half would be spent at the rescue center, maintaining their connections to the human community that had become their second family. Athon revealed that there were other dragon communities around the world, and if the arrangement with Sarah's rescue center proved successful, it might become a model for rebuilding the ancient alliance between species. Before departing, the great dragon bestowed gifts. Sarah found herself able to understand and communicate with all animals, not just dragons. Dr. Martinez discovered he could somehow comprehend any written language, no matter how ancient or foreign. Tommy was granted a special connection that would allow him to call the dragons if the community ever truly needed their help. The rescue center itself was blessed with protections that would ensure the safety of all creatures cared for there, and the surrounding area would flourish with unprecedented abundance. As evening approached, Aethon prepared to depart with the 3 young dragons for their first journey home in months. But the farewell was not sad. It was a celebration of new beginnings. "We will return with the spring rains," Ember promised in its sweet, chiming voice. "And we will bring others of our kind to meet you," added Mist. "The old fears between our peoples end here," declared Storm with wisdom beyond its years. As the 4 dragons took flight, ascending into the twilight sky, they left behind a community forever changed. The rescue center had become something unprecedented. A place where magic and mundane reality intersected, where ancient beings and ordinary humans had found common ground through the simple yet profound power of kindness. Sarah stood in her yard, watching the dragons disappear into the distance, knowing that her life's work had evolved into something far greater than she had ever imagined. The strayed Dragonlings had indeed grown into beings of immense power, but it was human kindness that had shaped how that power would be used. In the years that followed, as the alliance between dragons and humans slowly spread across the world, historians would point to that moment as the beginning of a new age. But Sarah would always remember it simply as the day she learned that love and kindness, offered without expectation, could literally change the world. The 3 Dragonlings had returned home, but they had left behind something precious, proof that different species could live together in harmony, and that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion have the power to reshape the future itself.